Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something on the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. And if you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. Also, if you or somebody you know would like to be on the show and have a conversation, be sure to reach out to me on X. My handle there is IsaacR11. You can reach out to me on Blue Sky. My handle there is IsaacR11.com. Or you can reach out to me on Mastodon. My handle there is IsaacR11 at fosandon.org. I have too many social medias. Anyway, I'm looking forward to my guest today. We were having a great chat before. I'm really excited to talk about community, talk about all sorts of other things in the developer space. My guest today is Michelle Stanford. Michelle, you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited to be on the show. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. And when we were talking about in the backstage area, quote unquote, one of the things that I mentioned to you is like I love how this show sometimes it goes off the rails, especially when we do like the origin story portion. People like to talk about their origin stories, right? And I'd love to hear yours. Like, when did you realize that technology was the thing for you and you decided to want to be a part of it?
Well, I think that is interesting because I am super, super old. Um,
Super.
when I,
You
when
don't
I
look
was in
old. You don't
school,
look old. So when I hear super, super old, I imagine quite old. I don't think you are super, super old. But anyway.
I'm pretty old. I'm just like half Asian. My mum's Singaporean, so I think that makes me look a little bit younger. And also the filter's doing good things, so it's not showing all my grey hairs.
Oh, okay.
But but yeah, there was no, when I was in high school, there was no computer class. Um, Not at all. There was no computers. We were doing everything on these things called books. I don't know if you've heard of them, but
Books.
yeah,
Is that like the thing that you open and there's like paper? That thing?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
cool,
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
So so
yeah.
antique of you.
Yes, exactly. So it wasn't even an option when I was picking where to go to university and what I was going to study. Computer science was not something that I even considered. I hadn't heard of it. There was no internet back then, although that's not strictly true. I should say there was no World Wide Web back then, so the
Okay.
internet was not accessible. There was no Google, none of that existed. And yeah, it was not something that I knew about. We did have like a Commodore 64, but that was really something that we played. We played a single game on, which my dad kept accidentally deleting, and then it required us to put like 20 discs in order
Okay.
to reload this one game. So
What was the game?
yeah, I don't even remember because it
Oh.
was so frustrating, the fact that he couldn't figure out how to play it without deleting everything and
You
so
like
yeah, that was my
you scrubbed it from your memory, which is kind of
yes.
funny. It was so drastic, so painful that you had to just
Mm,
no. And it was probably like, 20 discs that it is crazy to think like 20 discs is I don't know, like a couple megabytes probably. Um but it was probably like some very cheesy game that I think everybody who had a Commodore 64 played. Um so like you didn't have computers in that like you didn't have like yeah, I guess you think about technology today, right? You had access to computers at some point, but it was playing games. Like when did you like realize that like you enjoyed computers or like was it at the game is in the game world or was it like you enjoyed the idea of like technology making things work?
well, there I think you are mistaking my motivation for getting into things.
Okay.
So
Okay.
when you're a kid and I don't know if you've noticed this, but when you read any of the stories to your children,
Mhm.
there's none of those stories that start with, here's a child who is pretty average at life and then they work really hard every day and until they become very good at something and then finally they become the best in their field and that's what they do for their job. There are no books like that. What
No.
happens in children's books is there you are living your normal average life And one day someone comes to you and says, "You're a wizard, Harry." And then they
Yeah.
rescue you from your life, take you out, tell you you have these hidden talents, and this is what you are destined to be. And so that is what I was expecting. I
Okay.
thought someone was going to come along, declare that I was this special talent in this special thing, and that should be my job. And so I was pretty annoyed as a teenager when that had not happened yet. And, schools and universities were asking, what do you want to be? Where do you want to go? What do you want to study? And I'm like, how can I know that? Where is my Gandalf?
In
Why
Yeah,
is no
yeah,
one
yeah.
telling me?
That's yeah, that's fascinating. Like and we were talking about this before we got started. Like I kind of always knew that I liked computers. Like the second that I was introduced to one, I enjoyed it. Um and I've talked to a bunch of folks on this show that were like that they realized later in life like they had a different job, a different career and they decided computers was more interesting. Um I love the idea though that like I could just imagine like young Michelle like sitting there like with her hands on her lap like when is this gonna happen to me sort of thing like
Mhm.
there's like a song I can't there's a song that's like anyway I was gonna go on a tangent. I have to not think about whatever song that is. But I like the idea of like you waiting for uh inevitability, right? You're like
Mhm.
eventually like something is going to show up. Are
Mhm.
you so you mentioned that you were kind of becoming I'll summarize this like you're kind of getting impatient. Do you see yourself as a patient person in general? Or are you more like tell me right now like what the thing is? Like I don't have time for like the walking around the bushes sort of thing.
I'm pretty patient,
Yeah.
but it didn't occur to me at all that I could choose. Or
Yeah.
even though people were saying choose,
Sure.
it still seemed odd to me because I just thought, how can I know?
Yeah.
And in terms of what are you interested in? Everything. I was a B plus student in all of my subjects. So there was no one thing that I could say, I loved that thing more than any other, and I worked at it all the time. And so therefore, obviously, I'm going to be a writer or I'm going to be a chemist or I'm
Yeah.
going to be an
Yeah.
artist or like none of that stood out to me until someone told me what I could not do.
Mm.
And then I spent quite a few years making choices based around what people told me I could not do
Yeah.
because I turns out I hate that. When someone says you cannot do this thing, I
Sure.
immediately want to prove to them that I can do
Oh, of
that
course.
thing.
Of course. Yeah. No. So you said a few things there. I really want to I want to direct this conversation in a very particular way. So bear with me for a second. Um, so you said that you're like a pretty solid student in all the different categories, which I think is interesting, especially now that your career's in tech, where I think breadth versus depth is always a very interesting conversation.
Mm.
Um, you but then you said something as well, like you know you liked a lot of things. Are you a curious person by nature? Like, have you always been like very like, you'll pick up a book on, not to use your thing like chemistry. Like you'll kind of flip through and you'll want to learn more about chemistry. Are you like curious by nature across like all sorts of different disciplines?
It's more like, so chemistry is a good example in that it was the one that I needed to work really hard at in order to get that B plus. So
Okay.
I initially was a C student in that because I had moved from a more generic school to a specialist school. So I had only done a sort of combined science course previously. And then in my special school, chemistry was its own subject. And so
Okay.
I was behind the other students in that, and I found it very difficult because I hadn't heard of this before. I'd never seen the periodic table. And so, but I can't, like, it infuriated me to be a C student in
Sure. Sure.
that. And so I worked really, really hard, and I took extra classes with the teacher who was very smelly But I took extra classes
Yeah.
because I wanted to, I wanted to prove that I could be as good at that as anything.
Yeah.
And so it was, yeah, I guess um, an interesting divergence in my mind. On the one hand, expecting to be chosen for my
Mm,
special skills in
yeah.
something, and on the other hand, not believing that anything could be that special, that if I worked hard at it, I could achieve the same standard across the board.
That's fascinating. I love you like you the way you were kind of framing this. Like you're waiting for your destiny, right?
Hmm.
Like you use the Harry Potter analogy. Like I'm reading a book right now with my kids where this girl finds out that she can like go inside of books. It's a series of books. I think it's called the Book Wanderers. And like she was just told this, and I think it's fascinating. Like that you're waiting for and the inevitability of destiny. But then on the flip side, you're like, well, we choose our own destiny in this life. Like we have the ability to kind of navigate the world and figure out what we want to do. And it is not our choice whether or not we're good at that thing or we're bad at that thing. We can put a lot of work into it to be good or better, but like you said, there are some things that we're just never going to be good at. And
Oh,
uh,
no, I didn't say
oh, you didn't?
that.
Okay, okay, okay. So
I didn't say that at
correct me.
all
I'm
because
sorry.
I,
Sorry.
I don't definitely don't think that. Well, I think it wouldn't be possible for you to necessarily be the best in that
Mm,
field
sure.
if you had zero natural talent or
Yeah.
inclination to it. But I do think you could still be top 10% through hard work.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I I'm trying to think of a good anecdote or a good analogy, and it's slipping me. But I totally agree that if you put work into it, you can be good at something. What I was more going down the path is like this whole expert like phraseology, right? Where people talk like, oh, you put a lot of work into something, you'll eventually become an expert. I don't subscribe to the 10,000 hours thing. I really don't. I think that you could be good at a lot of things, but I think that there needs to be some genetic disposition for you to be like the upper 0.001% of something. But I think that you can be good. Like I play music. I'm not a very good musician, but like I've played a lot and I'm okay. And I think that that's fine. I think what's interesting though is for you in your case, you have like this extra level of like confidence in yourself. At least this is kind of how you're phrasing it. If it's wrong, you can correct me. That it's like, oh, I know I can be good at this. Like it's just a matter of me putting time and effort into it.
Well, that's the other thing I was thinking about before because I've been doing like my most recent conference talk. I talk about how you can overcome your imposter syndrome using
Sure.
GitHub Copilot. And
Oh yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
I'm I'm trying to like weave technology into a core skills sort of talk.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it is like that voice inside my head, that voice we all have inside our heads that holds us back from opportunity, that tells us we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not the best one, there's
Yeah.
someone better than us we should give the opportunity to. That voice is like is very hard to overcome.
Hmm.
The times where I have worked to overcome not being good at something is where someone external to myself has said, you're not good enough. Where
Yeah.
someone external has said, you're a C plus, not a B plus. Where someone has said, you can't do that, then I work to prove them wrong. My own internal imposter syndrome voice, very loud, very loud indeed.
Yeah, it is fast. Like I suffer from imposter syndrome. I've talked about this on the show a bunch. Like I question if you say you don't suffer from it to some extent. Like I
Yeah.
think it's very human nature to compare yourself to other people, whether in a positive light or a negative light. Um, but it's one of those things that at least and I think this is what's healthy for me. I just realize that it's a part of my being. It's a part of my makeup. And if I feel that way, I just kind of acknowledge the fact that it's there and like try to move on. Like what is as somebody that you're putting talks around this. You're thinking about this like in trying to give this advice on to other people. I'm not to say that you have everything figured out, but Like, what are some of the things that you have used, some tools that you've used to kind of combat sort of that anxiety or that imposter syndrome where you're trying to like be the best and compare yourself to people that are have completely different makeups than you do?
Well, I don't think that I try to be the best anymore. I think I
Okay.
just try to be helpful to people that are not as far along the journey as I am. So I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
everyone has something that they can teach others, even if you are a beginner in a subject. If you make your notes about what you're learning about that thing, or maybe put up a video of you learning to do that thing and talk through the problems that you encounter and how you overcome them, there are other people who will find that useful. So I don't try to be the best at all. But
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of tools that have helped me overcome it, I do think there's nothing that has helped me more than GitHub Copilot.
Sure. I mean, we can talk about like like individual technical things. I think that's pretty fast. Like I've done this thing a few times now where I don't know how to do something and I'll go to a Copilot or a Chat GPT and it's like just like do something for me. And then once I have like that base level of like the skeleton built out of something, I can learn a bit better, if that makes sense. I have a very hard time like starting at zero. Like
Yeah.
I get very much like analysis paralysis and I want to like over architect something or I want to think about all the edge cases before I write like one line.
Mm.
And what I've realized is that like some of these tools like they just get me one step off the ground, which is all I really
Yeah.
need. Which is pretty cool. I would like to kind of go back to, you know, not your origin story specifically, but I would like to know, being in tech is this, especially now. I think we were talking about like people getting started into tech before we got started. I think now like there's this like, oh, I want to get into tech because of like all of the money, all of the opportunity. I know exactly what I want to be when I get into tech. And I'm curious for you, like, did you go through like a traditional like you did comp sci at a university and you did all that? No, you didn't. Okay, so
So
with that,
I went when I went to university, what happened was I was at a very good school and I said I want to go to in the UK and I said I want to go to Oxford or Cambridge. And
mm,
they said Oxford or Cambridge is for students that are A plus students, not B
okay,
plus students,
okay,
A plus. Plus you're also your head girl and you're president of these clubs and all of those other things. And you are not. You can't go to those. And as I said, I hate that. And so I applied to those universities and the next tier of universities that people go to when they don't get into Oxford or Cambridge. And um, I received rejections from all of the universities that I applied for because, in the UK, how it happens is your school will say this is what she will get,
mm-hmm,
predictions, and the universities will make offers based on those predictions. And so if they're predicting me at B pluses and the universities want A pluses, then no offers.
yeah,
However, the day after you get your results, if you don't have any offers, you can call round all the universities and find out who was supposed to get A pluses and didn't get them, and therefore there are spaces in their courses. Um,
that's kind of
and so,
like it's kind of like waitlisting, right? To an extent, a little
yes,
bit. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's like that, except your name is not already on the list.
Sure.
So you're looking for the gaps that have now been presented, and so I called Durham, which was like that next tier beneath Oxford and Cambridge, and said, "Can I come there? These are my scores." And they said, "Yeah, if you want to do philosophy, you can come here." And I said, "I would love to do philosophy." I actually had no idea when I said that what philosophy was. I just knew that I wanted to go to this really good university that's like a castle, and
Sure.
so yeah, I was very lucky though because philosophy, it turns out, is the study of life, and it has a lot of stuff that set me on my path for where I am now. So I studied logic, I studied ethics, I studied moral philosophy, and those things really set me up for an interest in artificial intelligence and responsible AI, which is where I am now.
Yeah.
Um, but I suppose the final step to that is how did you go from philosophy to tech? And that was indeed a couple of boys in my second year who were physicists. I was living the Big Bang Theory and I was Penny.
Sure, sure. Yeah. That's great.
And they said they were mocking me and my other housemate because they said students that do arts degrees are not real. No, they're not real degrees,
Sure.
and
Okay.
we couldn't work as hard as they do. We couldn't study what they study. So I applied then to do a master's in computing science just to prove those boys wrong. And I did get into that. And it was super, super hard. I went from
Yeah.
5 hours a week in my undergraduate degree to like a full course load, 9 till 5 every day, plus 3 hours of homework, learning 5 programming languages from a background where I had no programming languages,
Mm.
um, in a 9 month master's degree. So yeah, it was full on, but
That
totally doable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me like you have a pretty strong work ethic, right? Like, I think as somebody who doesn't have a very strong work ethic, I see myself as quite a lazy individual. Uh, where do you think that comes from? Your strive to like work hard and your strive to do the best you can. Like, where do you think that comes from? Is that from parenting? Is that from just environment in general? Like, where do you think that comes from for you?
I'm Generation X.
Sure.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Generation X, we were all, latchkey kids. We were all abandoned from when we were 5 years old, when our parents went back to work, and we're just wandering around the streets and playing playing games till 9 p.m. at night by ourselves. So having to be by yourself, having to find your own sources of money, if you wanted
Yeah.
snacks and things like that. So I started working as soon as I was old enough to legally be allowed to do that and save my money. And I worked in all my university holidays. I worked at uni in the college bar, and I never really considered my parents' money to be my money, because I hadn't really been given it. My younger brother, he being the second child, he got pocket money and stuff like that because they kind of learned by then how other people were doing it. But for me, the oldest child and the Generation Xer, we were hyper independent. And so learning to grow up fast and
Yeah.
survive on your own was just like, that's how we do.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with my mother-in-law, who is Generation X as well, and I was talking about how, um, yeah, I think Generation X is like, in my opinion, and this is a spicy take, and if anybody gets offended, I apologize. Generation X was like in my opinion, like the first generation that realized like you have to pay attention to your kids when they became parents,
Mm,
because like you said, they were kind of left alone for so long.
mm,
So my parents are Generation X. My parents are a bit older, but my wife's parents are Generation X. And I was trying to give my mother in law a compliment, and she took it. So it wasn't like I did something wrong, but it's like I think Generation X. Like, I know a lot of people that have Generation X parents, and they seem like they had a fairly good childhood. They felt like their parents were engaged in their upbringing. Their parents were supportive, and I think that's gotten better and better over time. I think that parents like now are, maybe to an extent a little bit too much, but they care very much about like their kids, right?
mm.
But I think Generation X, in my opinion, was like the first generation that like started to care about, you know, hey, a kid needs a bit more than dinner and a place in a bed, right?
Mm.
So that is pretty interesting. See, you attribute your work ethic to the fact that you kind of had to figure everything out on your own, more or less,
Mhm.
right? Which I think is pretty fascinating. Here's a question: when did you realize there was money in tech? When did you realize that like it could be a career, it could be something that you could pay a mortgage, buy things you want? When did you realize that?
There's a couple of things there. So when I was in my second year doing philosophy, living with those physics boys, one of those boys had his own company and he was earning £20,000 per year,
Mm,
which was a full salary back then. And he was earning that whilst he was doing his full-time physics degree. And and he was doing that with computers. And so
okay.
um, I could see like straight off that there was ways to make money in that career.
Mm,
Um, more recently, the story that I like to tell students and kids is there's a boy called Thomas Suarez. If you look him up on the
okay.
internet, he's got a little TED talk. And when he was 7 years of age, he wrote his first app. And the money he got from that first app was enough for him to buy his own Xbox. And I
Mm,
would say to them, imagine all of you, you're 7 years old or older, imagine you don't have to ask your parents anymore for money to buy games, to buy an Xbox. You can do this now if you build your own apps. By the time he was 12, he had four more games and his own company.
yeah.
And, obviously not every kid is going to be that, but it is easier today for them to do that, much
Sure.
easier. I couldn't have done that at my age. That was not something that was possible back then. But now, yeah, you can absolutely do it. So, yeah, seeing that people are out there making money
Hmm.
and it doesn't matter. It does, I mean, it matters a little bit. Like, obviously, if you come from a very wealthy family that
Sure.
has a
Yeah, yeah.
computer in front of you and internet and all of that, you have a better chance and all that extra training. But even a poor kid has that opportunity to become a rich kid with a career in tech.
Mm,
Whereas many other careers, that is not necessarily the case. Like a doctor, for example, you need to invest a lot of money in that career before you can start reining that money back.
yeah.
Tech has so much less of an investment up front.
Yeah, I very, it's funny. I was talking like, so a little bit of inside baseball for me. Like, my kid has been asking, they're 9, and they've been asking for a gaming PC because like they're big into Minecraft and they see like these YouTubers who are like streaming on desktop and like they very much love that. And they're like, "Okay, I want a gaming PC." And I was very much against it because I think 9 is a little bit too young for a computer. And I finally gave in. Like, and I think a lot of it was motivated by the fact that I built a new PC and I had these parts left over, and I was like, if I buy like a couple of parts, if I buy like a somewhat okay video card and whatever in a case, like I can just make them a gaming PC. And we that was their Christmas gift. They got a gaming PC. It was very exciting, and like they're telling me that they want to get into building Roblox games. Like
Yes.
so they're like looking at like different tutorials on like how to build Roblox games and what you need to do, and they've already started to like they before like they want to learn Python, so we were playing around with Python. And I love your point about like how accessible tech is now. Like
Mm.
you basically just need a computer, and I know that that's hard for a lot of folks, but you
You
know
can access them in a library. You can
yeah,
go to a
yeah,
library and access
yeah.
computers for free.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating because I think about my generation. I think that we had access to a lot of stuff pretty quickly. Like I think the internet brought a lot of stuff, but you were talking about like, oh, Commodore 64 and your dad like erasing the game every single time. Like that's not very accessible. And then like the generation before that, like you talk to the crusty professor who had to walk up the hill both ways in the snow to like their punch cards and come back the next day. Like that's even less accessible. So, I think it's great that people have all of this access now to be able to learn technology. The big hang up that I have, and I've talked about this on the show a countless times, so I apologize, is like there's too many options now. Like if you want to get into tech, like we were talking about this before, it's like, kids these days now, like they know exactly what they want to be. They want to be a network engineer, they want to build Angular apps, or they want to know, like they know very, very quickly like what they want to build. And I immediately think it's like, man, there are just so many options and so many tools and so many things you have to learn. And I get overwhelmed as somebody who is in tech. And I'm somebody who's curious and I like to learn new things all the time, but like I look out in the world and I'm like, man, if I want to just pick up something and learn something new, it's not easy.
But I mean, it is easy if you want to pick up something specifically.
Sure.
So if you think, I want to learn that thing, you can absolutely go and find a learning path that will take you through it. You can also find a YouTube video that will take you through it. You can also find like a bunch of different ways that you can access that learning so that you can understand it. Yeah, where I was talking about Copilot, you don't get it, you can ask Copilot, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me like I'm five? Or can
Yeah.
you show me 10 different ways to do the same thing? That kind of thing. So the learning of the thing is absolutely there for you. The choosing of the thing, the what do I do, what do I be, is still as perplexing as it was when I was waiting for Gandalf to tell me. Um, and but I think that we shouldn't be like those kids that are definitely decided it's a network
Yeah.
engineer or it's a security one. We should be aware of the fact that every night hundreds of new features are released, hundreds of new technologies, like loads of different ways of doing stuff. And we should just be open to learning, to have that continuous learning mindset within us, and to say, let's let's look for something we are interested in or look for something that we find interesting and start following that path. And if there are things off it that then distract us, so like where April Yoho was talking about how automation is something that has always fascinated her. You
Hmm.
know, if there's something that you see that you can seize on, absolutely go down that path and follow that. But until you do, maybe just follow like start a path like in free code camp, for example. I think that's really great because they say if you want to learn a specific thing, then fine, search for it and learn it with us. If you don't know what you want to learn, start at the beginning, start here and just follow the path through. And I just think that's really good as well because yeah, you start that thing, you follow that course, and until you find something that interests you more, you just keep going. A little bit of learning every day, a little bit more tomorrow, a little bit more the day after. And before you know it, you are becoming very good in your field. And I hesitate with an expert because, yes, I think you
Sure.
do need to put an awful lot of time in to become the expert. But I don't think you need to be an expert in tech. I think you just need to have embraced that continuous learning mindset and be willing to learn and keep that mind open. Because from the moment you say, I know everything, uh, don't talk to me about blah, blah, I know you're wrong, it's this, not that,
Sure.
then you are doomed. But otherwise, yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful career to be working in.
If I could just make a comment, like your optimism is very makes me feel good as somebody who's a kind of a natural pessimist, and hearing somebody that's so optimistic and so like, yeah, like it's work, but it's worth it. It's refreshing. So thank you for you're kickstarting my day with great stuff. So um so when you got out of university and you had like this, this, you've worked hard, you put this time in, you know about computers. Like, were you able to get a job right out of university, or did you have to go into a different field and then you got into tech? Like, what was your entry into tech as a worker?
Well, I embraced the same techniques that I had been embracing. I kind of put a lot of applications out into the world and to see what was the best offer that came back in.
Hmm.
So I put in some things for maybe I'll carry on learning, so do a PhD in something. Um, some things for just like generic graduate schemes with big companies, because there it seemed like you don't need to pick. They're going to give you a year's worth of training and set you on a path.
Hmm.
Um, and also, I had been working behind the bar all the while I was at uni. And I'd been doing that in my holidays as well. So hospitality industry was very well known to me. So I did, in fact, get a job with a company called Whitbread Inns, which were a large brewing and hotel company in the UK. And I started working for them. The guy employed me. He was interested in my hospitality industry experience, but also my computing science, because at that time they were looking at taking those old style mechanical tills out of the pubs and replacing them with FPOS tills that are all connected together, connected back to the head office. All the
Okay.
data all the data was in the system. It would know what they needed to order automatically. It would know how much money they had on premises. Like all the things would be in a computer system. And so he thought I might be useful in working with that. So we started we started on that project, and I was part of a team that would go around to pubs, would train the managers, we'd put in 5 tills and a back office computer. We'd train them, and I'd do help desk for that, which is the proper place to start a tech career. And I am always a little bit mistrustful of people that work in tech who have never worked on the service desk,
Sure.
because I feel like they have not suffered as they should.
Yeah. 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 It's my so I did help desk for at the university that I was at for a bit. I did help desk as an internship. I worked at Geek Squad. So I the customer service aspect of that world is very, very important in my opinion. I think hearing someone's problem, having that empathy, and then being able to fix that problem and help them like get on with their day, especially if they don't have this, it's a very important, it's very important work. And it's also like one of those things that just kind of made you feel good. Like I remember like constantly like people would come in with like random issues on things and I'd be able to help them. And you feel a bit better about yourself because you're solving a direct problem for somebody that can't figure it out themselves. And it is kind of funny how for whatever it's worth, like that help desk, IT desk like role has always kind of been, I don't want to say made fun of, but it's always kind of like thought lesser. Like I've never really understood that. And
It's
go ahead, you have something to say?
it's the most difficult job in
Yes,
an organization, because
yes,
someone, anyone from your organization could call you up to tell you anything, any
mm-hmm.
technology thing is broken, and you, theoretically the most junior person in the organization, is
Yep,
expected to take both their anger and their impatience and their broken tech thing that could be anything, and
yep,
have the knowledge to resolve that for them. And then the higher up you go, second line support, third line support, you need to know less and less. Well, you need to know more and more about less and less. So you have like a specialism. You just need to know networks, or you just need to know, admin, or you just need to know something. Whereas that person, the help desk person, is expected to know everything, and people are
mm-hmm.
yelling at them,
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and they're still able to solve those problems. To me, someone who has worked on service desk and survived that for more than a couple of years is likely to be an excellent hire, because they can
yeah.
do anything after that.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it is kind of fascinating, and I think I've said this story on the show. I feel like I've said that a lot on the show, so I apologize to people that have actually been listening for a while. When I was working at Geek Squad, like I had a manager tell me, like I can give you like any book, and you can learn about computers, and you can learn how to do these things, right? But I can't teach you like how to have a conversation with someone. Like I can't teach you how to listen to somebody, hear their problem, and then talk to them in a way that's not condescending, and also talk to them in a way that they understand how their problem is going to be solved. And that resonated with me a lot because I think, and this is not a knock on people in tech, but I think there's a segment of people in tech that kind of have like that elitism where it's like, oh, I know about technology and you don't.
Mm.
And it's always been very fascinating to me. It's like why people in tech think that like people in that don't know tech are kind of like, I know not to say inferior, but like I like the complaint of like, oh, I got to help my friend with the printer, or I got to do this. Like it's such a pain. Um, I don't mind it because I know that if I don't feel good, like I'm gonna go to a doctor because that doctor knows what they're doing, right?
Mm.
I'm not gonna try to like figure out what's wrong. I do it anyway. Like I look at WebMD or whatever, but that's because I'm a weirdo. But like I eventually go to an expert or somebody that can speak to me in the way that I need to be spoken to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing too that, so when you got started, what sort of technologies were you did you actually enjoy working on? Because I think a lot of us when we get a first job in tech, like we're kind of just thrown into it, and we're probably doing stuff that like, oh, I never did this in school. Like nobody told me about this COBOL thing, or
Mm.
this whatever, right? But eventually you find like the areas of tech that you like that you actually enjoy. Like, do you remember like a particular project or something that you were working on where you're like, oh, like this is fun. I enjoy, like you're excited to go into work the next day because you got to work on something that you found interesting.
So there's a few things. So I did like I enjoyed second line support. I enjoyed like doing desktop stuff. So we would do like rollouts. So we'd go from Windows 3.11 to Windows 2000, Windows NT. Like I enjoyed the rolling out of operating systems
Mm,
because there was something very relaxing about doing that and going around in the middle of the night normally and replacing people's PCs
sure.
and getting that done like a ninja in the night. But I also enjoyed like the troubleshooting part because it's like people think it's hard, people think it's impossible, but in fact a lot of the time it's just logically sorting through things piece by piece and just trying things um, in order again and again and and getting things done. And I remember one time I had a whole team of lads in Ireland who had been trying to get something up and running and they couldn't do it. And I had arranged to go over there for the day, and I would spend the day troubleshooting, and then I'd come back. And the plane was delayed.
Oh wow.
Sorry, the plane was delayed like a lot, several hours. So I would literally touch down in Ireland, drive to the site. I'd have an hour with the PC, and then I'd need to like drive back again and get out. So, like the excitement of knowing if I couldn't fix it in an hour, and all these other lads had already been, working on it and couldn't find a way, and I just got in there. And I did it, and then just like drove out, and I was just like, wow, I'm like James Bond, but for computers.
Sure, sure, yeah. No, that's fun. Like you know, I've done like a fair share of like having to do updates and things like that at when I was doing help desk stuff. And it was so funny that you would think something would just like how what could go wrong, right? And then like when you're actually doing it, you're like, oh, like everything could go wrong. Like computers don't boot up, or somebody calls you and is like, oh my, my browser link isn't on my desktop anymore. Like what happened, right? And it was always there's always things to keep you on your toes in that space.
Well, working for a brewing company, that was the most interesting thing. What you would find is you would turn up in an office and there would be an old PC sitting under a desk in a corner of the room with no monitor or anything, but it's on and it's running. And that's running some critical brewing process. And
Sure.
it's running on DOS and the computer is you can't do anything with it because if you turn it off, it's not going to start up again. That kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
scenario. And so discovering those really old computers, trying to figure out what was on them, trying to find a way, because there was no virtual machines back then either. So it's not like you could just take that and put it in the cloud. No, you had to find a way to replicate something without there being a virtual container that you could put this thing in.
Yeah.
And no one would have even seen that before because the guy that built that thing was like left the company 20 years ago and it had just been sitting under the desk
Yeah.
ever since. Those were cool. Those were fun. Terrifying, but yeah, fun puzzles.
Yeah, it's always fascinating, like the things that people find interesting too. Like I'd imagine there's a lot of people out there that think of like working help desk and they're like, oh, like tedious, like repetitive stuff, like doesn't seem interesting to me at all. And I disagree. I think that there's like some fascinating like little idioms between everything. Um, when did you realize like so eventually like you like building things or being a developer was something that fascinated you? Like when did you realize like that was something that like developer like work building like building solutions for problems, like when was that something like that kind of extends to like you're solving problems in the help desk space, but now it's like building actual implementations to solve problems?
I just went through all of the jobs. So I went
Sure.
from service desk to second line support, which was desktop, and then to third line, which was, network and admin stuff. Then I became like an architect and, you know, did a lot of like big rollouts and, planning for how we're going to go from one something to the next something and what that's going to look like. And just going through each of the things, each time there was always something or like probably someone that I met that I thought, wow, that person is so cool. I
Yeah.
love what they're doing. I want to do what they're doing. And here it wasn't even developer, it was probably developer advocacy. And there was some guy, and I think he was at SAP or something like that, and he had written this blog post about how you become an advocate by being an advocate. You don't actually wait to get the job title
Hmm.
before you become an advocate. You just do it. And you do it by, building stuff, by teaching stuff, by talking about stuff, by sharing stuff, by building communities. And I just started doing all of those things. And um, yeah, by the time I got a job in developer relations, I had been doing I'd been doing a role at Microsoft for 8 years, and it was a customer facing relationship type role. It wasn't
Mm,
even really a technical one. And people had stopped seeing me as technical within Microsoft
sure.
because my job was relationship. But um, all my community stuff was kind of, well, that was developer stuff. We were teaching women to code, teaching students to code. We were, yeah, doing stuff very developery. And how I finally managed to merge the two was I just did a bunch of Microsoft certifications.
Mm,
And
okay.
I know anyone that has done those certifications knows that, and I think April, yeah, Harry mentioned it as well, that, when you do exams, that doesn't enable you to be able to do the thing. It just
Sure.
proves that you can do exams and that you
Yeah.
can you can accumulate knowledge and you can be logical about it, which is absolutely a fact. However, people do take you more seriously when you have those credentials. And so
Yes.
all of a sudden, in my office, where people thought I wasn't very technical because I had been doing relationship stuff for so long, suddenly they started regarding me as the most technical person in the office because I had more credentials than anyone else. Yeah, it was a big step. My best friend as well, George, he started when he applied for Microsoft. Well, he must have applied to Microsoft about 5 times in the year before he got the job. And he just kept, doing those job interviews and doing more Microsoft certifications. By the time he got the offer, the hiring manager said to him, "You've got more Microsoft certifications than anyone in the team. So what do you want to do? Do you want to do this job or do you want to do this job?" So it really does open up your options to you, even though you and I know they don't really make you a better developer or a better
Yeah.
anything else, but other people recognize that you know how to learn and that you're willing to prove
Yeah.
it, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's great because, we've been talking for a while now, and like it's very clear to me that you have this drive to learn and, feed the curiosity that you have. And I think that when you're getting started, you need like a little help. And somebody like you who can definitely sit there and help guide people in the right direction, like whether it's creating content or talking at events or whatever, right? I think it's awesome. And I think one of the things that I'd love to end on is like the spirit of community, right? Like for folks that don't know, like you're very well known and involved in like the community space. And I'd love to kind of finish on like why community is so important to you and where do you think, community it like what is a sign of a healthy and thriving community, and like maybe what are some signs for communities that could do better?
Well, you and I, before we came on this podcast, we were
Yeah.
talking about extroverts and introverts. And I said that my understanding of it was, in fact, that where you get your energy is how you make the definition. So if you are super tired and then going out to a party energizes you because you're connected with all those people, then that makes you extrovert. Whereas if you, after having been with lots of people, need to take like 2 days to sort of calm your brain down and just, relax and restore yourself, then that makes you introvert.
Mm-hmm.
One of the communities that I work with is called She Codes Australia, and it's a community where they teach women to code. And they have these 1 day workshops where people can go along, and it's their first opportunity to learn how to code. And they are super busy days. So there'll be like 100 women there to learn to code, and there'll be, 40 mentors. And so a really busy environment. Everyone's new to it. They're all trying to learn stuff. And normally I get my energy from being alone with my dogs on the beach and just, getting my alone time will bring me back to myself.
Yeah.
But if I have signed up to help with a She Codes event, even if I'm exhausted, I will still go because that community restores me. That community makes me feel calm, makes me feel happy, makes me feel loved. Even though I am there to help them, I feel like they help me. They lift me up. And so, yeah, that is a super healthy community in my view.
Yeah.
And it's not just women, there are guys who are mentors there as well, but all of them gentle, kind, supportive, wanting to help lift people up, wanting to encourage people. Wonderful thing. Um, I don't have a lot of experience with toxic communities. Obviously, you're still on X, so you
Yeah.
know that they
Yeah.
are out there. I have abandoned it entirely because I
Yep.
do not wish to I do not wish to see that stuff. Um, I guess the most difficult thing for me is a lot of the communities, developer communities I go into, I'll be the only woman there. And that can be a struggle because people, you're very alone, you're very isolated in that community. And it's not bad for me now. Well, I am in my with my community presence. Everyone knows me and they make me feel welcome and they are glad to see me and people will always chat to me. But if I was a woman coming into that community alone, that would be a real struggle. So I guess um, it's like it's so odd that even in 2024 there is that gap because to me tech is such like anyone can do it. You can work from home to do it. You can set your own hours to do it. There's no reason at all why, having a baby or having to take care of children should hold you back. And in
Sure.
Microsoft, we see a lot of the guys in the office have tremendous relationships with their families because they're able to be the ones to drop off their kids at school and pick them up from school because there's no one saying, why aren't you in the office between 9 and 5? Why aren't you
Yeah.
sitting at your desk? And tech should be the great enabler, the great leveler. So I do find it a bit baffling as to why there is still so few women in tech. And yeah, just and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wish we had more time because I think that's an entire topic to like. You can talk for hours on that topic as to why we're still not seeing it. It's getting better, but we're still nowhere near where we should be in this space, right? Like, um, but I think one thing I'll just give my opinion. I'll give you the opportunity to give your opinion too. I think that in general, um, men or people that identify as men at times like to gatekeep. And and what I mean by that is there's always like this superiority complex that comes with being male in general. Like I'm not saying everybody subscribes to this, but I'm saying that in general patriarchy is a thing, right? And I think that in tech specifically, if I'm going to get into a field and I'm somebody who isn't male, uh, I have to be hyper aware of the fact that I'm having to put up with a lot of people that are think they're superior to me just because of that. And I think for a lot of people, I think that it's not worth it. Even though they have the skills, even though they have the drive, even though they have all of the things necessary, it's not worth it. And that bums me out. Because I think that this industry, this section of whatever you want to call it, of the world, can benefit from as many different altering viewpoints as possible.
Mm.
And the fact that the primary viewpoint looks like me is kind of a bummer to me. I'll let you give you an opportunity. Like, if you want to say something, if not, we can kind of move on. But I'm just like, I think that a lot of it has to do with just a lot of folks that aren't white men don't want to put up with that as much as humanly possible. They got to do it for everything else, like not in this area as well.
It's well, I think there's like the pipe is part of it in that people coming in, there's less women that come in at the start of the pipe than there are men. It's, we don't come in at 50-50 even at
Mm-hmm.
the beginning. And so there, like the messaging at schools, the messaging from the media, the messaging from the world around you is still very much, boys are good at maths and technology, girls are good at helping people and people skills and being social.
Sure, sure.
Um, you know, and that messaging, that marketing is what drives people to make their decisions early on in life. Then as you go in, there is still like an ongoing pressure for if you're going to progress. Um, well, and you're a woman, well, maybe you want to become a manager.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you want to have a team, which then means you will become less technical again. So even if you
Yeah.
were an engineer, and it seems like that's a promotion to you, it seems like that's a great opportunity. But in fact, the push to take care of people rather than technology is is a thing that people are like subconsciously, I think, even trying to push women into that. So again, even though there was few people, there becomes less because they are moving them away from technical into people management. That's a whole other
Yeah.
argument because
Yeah.
I totally believe that you should be able to progress through your levels as a technical person and
Yes.
not have to become a people manager.
Yeah,
Um,
it's funny. We had a similar conversation the last episode with Jeremiah Dooley, who had a very similar thought process, right? Where it's like, if you want to stay technical, like you can stay technical, but like you shouldn't be forced into like this world of managing people if it's something you're not interested in. But a lot of people, that's the choice they have because they want to like progress in their careers, right?
Mm.
Yeah, and I'm glad that there's some companies out there that let you continue to progress in your career as an individual contributor, which
Mhm.
I think is pretty cool. Um, this conversation has been awesome, Michelle. Like I looked at the clock and I was like, oh man, we've been like it's almost done. That's rough. Like I wanted to keep talking about more and more stuff. I would love to kind of as we part, I'd love to kind of get your outlook on things. We've been talking a lot about kind of your journey in tech and what you find interesting about it and how like your dedication and devotion to doing things has kind of driven you through things. I'd love to kind of get your your thoughts on tech going forward with from your viewpoint, if that makes sense. Like I'd love to kind of hear those if you don't mind.
Well, as you say, I do tend to to put the optimistic message out there
Yeah.
because I do not think that it helps people to hear doom and gloom all the time. But I would
Sure.
like to acknowledge that since the pandemic, working in tech has been a much darker, harder, colder place. And I think since Gen AI has come out, we've seen a lot of layoffs across the whole industry. We've seen a lot of pressure on people to be more productive with less.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I think it's premature of our companies to do that because the the productivity savings are not as much as they have already shed people for. And so I do want to say this is a hard time to be working in tech. And so do not feel bad if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling burnt out, if you're feeling like it's all too much. Do reach out to your community, find friends around you in your team, in your community, in your network, and, talk to them. Where we were talking about the imbalance between men and women in the industry, I do want to remind everyone that we aren't enemies. Men and women aren't
Yep.
enemies. The
Yep.
patriarchy is definitely an enemy because the patriarchy is the thing that stops men getting the help and support and being able to talk about the pressure they're under to each other. And that's part of what keeps suicide levels in men so high, that they are not able to share, not able to grieve, not able to get that support that they need. So, yes, down with the patriarchy, turn to
Yes.
each other for love and support. I hope within the next year or so, things will reach a more even keel. But in these dark times, yes, just remember that we are in the most interesting industry in the world. It is changing every day. There's lots of new interesting stuff. You can always find a new thing to learn. Even when bad things happen, as they inevitably do,
Yeah.
um, find something to keep you taking one step forward. Because as long as you can always move towards something interesting, something positive, then you won't stay in the darkness for long.
That's great. I have nothing to say. That was excellent. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation. Want to thank you so much, Michelle, for hanging out with me for an hour. For the folks that aren't already following Michelle or subscribing to all the stuff that she posts all over the interwebs, there's a couple. There'll be some links in the show notes to some cool things that she is working on, as well as some places to find her. I think the best place is right now is probably Blue Sky for you, right? Which you could find at Codess-Oz, so CODESS-AUS.bsky.social. She's also on LinkedIn and GitHub and YouTube, and there'll be some links in the show notes to that as well. So before we leave, do you have any parting words?
It's been really great to be on the show. I
Yeah.
would definitely say that LinkedIn is my primary social,
Okay.
so that's
Cool.
the best place to go. I am trying to build up my YouTube following though, so I would love it if you could subscribe to me on there. And yeah, hopefully I will come back in the future and speak to Isaac again because this has been so much fun.
Oh, I had a blast too. And thank you everybody for tuning in live and the people that are listening in the future. My name is Isaac Levin, And this has been Coffee and Open Source, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. For my friend Michelle, take care.